My name is Cliona Ní-Doin. I'm the O'Donnell Chair of Irish Language and Literature, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to this reading, which is co-sponsored by the Keonaughton Institute for Irish Studies, the Institute for Social Concerns, and the Creative Writing Master's Programme. So I want to thank all of our co-sponsors for making this happen. And I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful evening. Martina Evans is one of my favourite poets. She started out writing novels, and then she converted. So she has written 13 books of poetry and prose. Her most recent book, The Coming Thing, which I really recommend to you and from which you'll be reading this evening, is on sale over there in the bookshop. It was shortlisted for the Derek Walcott Prize for Poetry. One of the books that I really admire is a book called Now We Can Talk Openly About Men. This also published by Carcanet, and it was an astonishing long poem looking at women's experience of the War of Independence and the Civil War in Ireland. And Roy Foster, the historian, described it as being unputdownable and said that reading it was like listening to the keyhole of history. American Mules, which was published in 2021, and which is also available over there from the bookshop, was a TLS and Sunday Independent Book of the Year, and it won the 2022 Pigott Poetry Prize. Martina is a fellow of the Royal Literary Society. She is a poetry critic for the Irish Times, and her most recent, or her forthcoming book, Drunken Driving, which will appear from Carcanet in 2026, is a book which is about drunken driving, but it's also a book about the prison experience. And the Stinging Fly magazine, which is really Ireland's leading literary journal, is publishing 10 pages of this forthcoming collection in the autumn. So if you want to get a flavour, the Stinging Fly is the place to go. But in the meantime, I would like you to give a warm round of applause and a wonderful Notre Dame welcome to Martina Evans.
Thank you, Cliona. I admire Cliona's work very much. It's very special to be invited by Cliona to come here and to come to Notre Dame, which I'm enjoying very much. It's a very beautiful place as well, and the weather is beautiful and strange at the moment. So I'm just really chuffed to be invited, and thank you all for coming. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, because the mic is there, isn't it? Okay, so it's interesting. I remember when I started out writing, I was in love with Proust, and I still love his writing very much. And I think that's what I wanted. I wanted to write like remembrance of things past. But of course, when I wrote, it was very different. The only thing that I've realised now as I'm getting older is that I've become very attached to Imelda, who's a character, so a bit like the M in Proust's writing. So I'm following this character who has a similar trajectory to me, but it is fictional as well, Imelda. So her first outing was in a novel, prose poem called Petrol. And she lived in a pub, family pub, run by her father, who had 3 wives, and he's called Justin. And it's just 12 miles outside Cork in the country. And now she's 18, she's at University College Cork, studying science and hanging around with lots of punks, because it's 1981. And it's a book very much about life and death. Convent girls then, we didn't know anything about contraception, and it was very hard to get hold of in Ireland. 1981, it was coming up to the 1983 referendum in Ireland where abortion was outlawed and written into the constitution, and of course this has been overturned since. But it was a time of great ignorance and I suppose fear, and also at the same time, because this is a book that's very interested in life and death, the hunger strikers were dying in the north of Ireland in the Maze prison, and that's a very interesting aspect of life and death, and the idea of controlling whether you live or die. And so Justin is, she always feels Justin's watching her. He's a very overpowering father, and she's hoping she can't be seen in Cork, but then people recognise her and say hello, so she pretends she doesn't know them. So it's not that she's being snobbish, it's just that she doesn't want Justin to know what she's up to, but it's hopeless because his eyes are everywhere. You know, people complain about CCTV camera nowadays, you know, that we're being watched all the time. Well, you should try growing up in a small Irish village. You didn't need CCTV, you had moving ones that could listen and move their necks and follow you everywhere. So I'm just going to read a section from the beginning and then a section further on. And I think it's just self-explanatory. So I'll start now. Justin said I'd been seen passing a joint on Patrick's Bridge when I thought I was pure and visible. Escaped. But your Knocklown was only 12 miles away. Johnny O'Hare turned up at a 21st party on Coburg Street. 2 31-year-olds were holding it 10 years late, and he said, "Hello, Imelda," and I said, "I don't know you," and turned my back in my wet look yellow anorak under the navy sky. Drowning out home, holding seances with red-haired Donny and Dora and Carl near Wilton Shopping Centre. When science became a stranger to me, boiling panic took root. Cork City and Knocklown merged. When one was above ground, the other creaked underfoot. Justin's black tar eyes running everywhere. "I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said cunning old Fury. 2. Sam Cooke was singing about not knowing much about a science book. And what about the French she took? "Ah, she's good at French," Agnes said when I walked in and herself and Justin roasting mushrooms on the range. "You'd want to keep away from the mushrooms," Justin said when he saw me. "Have you seen the size of you?" "Ah, no," said Agnes. "But remember when she took up domestic science and dropped the toast in the poached egg water?" I remembered dropping red-hot shortbread fingers and scraping dough off the cracked blue lino, Justin sending over me his black eyes. "Domestic science, how are you?" Turning the other cheek, I said, "But I do know that I love you," and Justin said, "You've lost the fecking plot." And I said, "But that's the chorus of the song you were singing." "What song?" said Agnes. 3. Justin said he'd heard I dissected a shark with a handkerchief over my face. Did I think I was the Ned Kelly of science? "But Ned Kelly has his head in a bucket," I said, and Justin said I could write that down. "I hear you're hanging around with a cheap crowd up in Cork." And when old Johnny O'Hare asked in the shop what was I doing in Cork, Justin said, "Sweet fuck all." And old Johnny O'Hare said, "Oh right, so I'll have 20 cars and a box of red matches," and drove off fast in his powder blue Cortina. "And he's a fucking wife killer," said Justin, looking after him. "You can see his beard growing while he's talking to you." Agnes said she said nothing. It hurt her to the quick to be even asked. But someone was giving Justin information, like in a police state. 4. "Dora's fierce intellectual," I said. "But where did I think she'd get a job with arts?" Justin wanted to know. He made arts sound like farts. After I doing science to be sensible like Agnes, she's a bloody female engineer. Can you believe it? Justin said, and I wanted to be unbelievable too. But it wasn't like school, where Sister Joseph's wooden table was clean, dry, stacked with pictures of brains and hearts to be coloured in, like holy pictures, Venus blue and arterial red. Notes on the reproductive system handed out silently. No stinking, no dripping, no dogfish. That desperate army of jaws. Was it even fair to them? Should they be slaughtered for our education? I'm thinking about that too, like Sedora. So we were dissecting a lot of dogfish, but maybe that's clear. I don't know if people still dissect dogfish, but it was a long time ago. 5. Dora said she'd go straight to England if she ever got in trouble. She was the youngest of 10 and a mistake, and when the priest visited her family, he was bent over, red with laughing, pointing, "Look at the mistake, hasn't she grown into a fine, strong girl?" There wasn't enough love to go round, and only a fool would expect it. Dora was a utilitarian. She said there had to be population control, like for cats. People couldn't go on reproducing themselves like they were only brilliant like, and they were never objective about their own blue-eyed boys. What's the first thing a traveller will tell a married woman when she sits down in her caravan to have her fortune told? Your daughter will be successful in catering, and your son will rise to the top of whatever it is. 6. How did some people always know what to do, like dissect a rabbit, cut a plant cross-section for a slide, poach eggs and make shortbread? Silver spoons and confidence from birth, said Dora. Isn't it awful to think there might be no justice? I worried along with Dora. Will the first shall be last? We didn't know. We knew nothing. Just don't add to the population in the name of God, Dora said, and I said I hadn't a notion of it. I could hardly support myself doing the wrong thing. But Justin wouldn't let me do arts. I had to do science. And after that it was supposed to be computer science because that was the coming thing. But really he'd prefer I did nursing, which was the steadiest job of all. I'll keep telling you, till I'm blue in the face. 7. Get a bank loan, said Justin, and his face was scarlet, not blue. But I'm sure I'm on the wrong course. Justin cut me off. Anyone who comes along, chopping and changing, has no character, no backbone. His third wife, Clodagh, told me to go easy on the studying because I was so highly strung, and Agnes said arts was bad for the nerves. Nerves, shouted Justin. No one with nerves could be that fat. Old Danny Boy has real depression, and he's like a pull-through for a rifle. Coming home with blown-up eyes like an addict after you've been seen passing a joint on Patrick's Bridge. But it was only a rollie washed down with a bottle of Benylin because of the desperate cough I got when I hit the blue chatan after I left the convent. And that's why I had to go for the Benylin, for the tickly cough. I don't know if you've got Benylin here. A lot of the hip-hop singers like, what did they call it? The lean, it was the something lean. Yeah, that was it. Justin thought he was the only man in the world with a pain or an ache, and he was always rolling up the legs of his trousers to show me the fat blue branches of his varicose veins snaking round his hairy red leg. Look at that, he said, and I'm not even fat, giving me a disgusted, tarry black look, as if I was the one who should have varicose veins. How many weeks did Sean McStephane last on hunger strike? And you can't even get between breakfast and lunch without a pop. I was sure I must be the only girl in Ireland to be subjected to that kind of leg display by her father, and Dora thought she must be the only child in Ireland to be tormented about being a mistake by a priest. So in a way, we were thinking we were extraordinary too. That's youth for you. Doesn't last long. So I'm going to move on a bit. So with all this talk about not adding to the population, they both get pregnant. And I should have explained that if you ever get into trouble, trouble is used in various ways in Ireland, isn't it? With the troubles, but also if a girl got into trouble, if you said she was going to England, it meant she was going for an abortion. So now that's where they are. It's later in the year. So it's a private clinic in Brixton, which is a great part of London, and it's also, I don't know if people know Linton Kwesi Johnson. He was a dub poet, and there was a lot of cross-fertilisation between the reggae artists and the punks in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was a time of great strife, and a lot of racism, a lot of fighting and that. And the music brought the white music artists and the black music artists together, so it was a really good and powerful thing. So I mentioned Linton Kwesi Johnson. He's just a hero of mine, and he's known by his fans as LKJ, but I call him Linton Kwesi Johnson here. And he turns up because I'm going to read a little bit from the poem that's set in Pentonville Prison. And when I was there, his poetry really kept me going. So he was like a guiding spirit when I was in Pentonville, because it was a terrible place, terrible prison. And I used to in a kind of a stupid way, imagine that he'd come in and sort them all out, if only he knew, which was ridiculous. But anyway.
I think you should mention, Martina, that you were in Pentonville Prison as a radiographer and not an inmate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a men's prison, so even if I wanted to, they wouldn't have me. So they're in London now. 63. We only had the address. Carl got the name of the clinic from some girl who didn't want to be brought into it. I asked if it was different from the one at the back of Cosmopolitan, and Carl said, they're blacked out in the Irish Cosmopolitans. Well, I'd never looked, had I? Carl was under massive strain, and I had an alias. What's next? Said Dora. But Carl said it was a great idea. My name is Jackie Clark, I said, as we left the bed and breakfast, and then I had to sit down on the stone steps of a 4-story house in Pentonville to put my head between my knees. I asked Carl if he thought it was right. Is it really like? And he said, we've paid now. And we went down into the underground at Holloway, and the noise of the tube went through my stomach as if I'd swallowed the tracks. So they go down and then they come up. 65. You're doing brilliant, said Carl. I don't think so, I said, looking at the woman. They passed a woman outside the clinic who was crying a lot. Looking at the woman who seemed way too old for this. We're here now, he said. And I moved again, no longer a small mole, but a giant stumbling cow. And then I was in a prefab, and it was like Benetton's. All the girls were tanned and very good looking, and their pink and orange and blue sweaters had fuzzy halos from the morning sun coming through the windows. They were quiet, turning the pages of Woman's Realm, Woman's Own, Cosmopolitan, but I heard 2 of them speaking Spanish. They seemed worldly wise. And I wondered what Murphy meant when he asked Dora, is reproduction the cheapest way of recruiting moral agents? And Dora said, you don't know what you're talking about, boy. But I liked Murphy asking questions. And then when I looked around for Carl, he was gone. So when she goes into the clinic, everybody else is Spanish, because Franco was still in Spain, so they didn't. The Spanish girls had to come to England for abortions as well. So that's what happens when you outlaw it. So it's all very much up in the air now, isn't it? So 66. Jackie Clark, shouted a tall English sister with red cheeks, and her dark blue uniform was clipped at the waist, and there was a white frilled pillbox on her head like a crown. Little Irish, she said, when she heard my Cork accent. The examining doctor said I was 8 weeks, and I said I was 12 weeks, and I said I thought I was 8, but that only seemed to madden her. And sister came back in and told the doctor she was taking me away from the foreigners. Next patient, please, said the doctor. And sister said it was a pity my boyfriend had gone, because he could have stayed. Her chest was staked with badges and the upside-down silver watch which she watched as she pumped up the sphygmanometer. I went off on the trolley in a pink gown, and a surgeon passed with gloved hands in the air. I was afraid to tell them I thought the trolley was going too fast. 67. I woke up screaming and struggling and asking them to leave me alone. They had something inside of me. Tranquilo, tranquilo, said the Spanish girls, upset for me. I wanted them to stay, but sister drove them away. Leave that girl alone, she said, and she poured a glass of water to wash down 2 small yellow circles of Valium. I slept for a while, and then she woke me. Carl was on the phone from the pub where the wedding crowd went after Hackney Town Hall. Murphy's cousin was really getting married, and she was wearing the Cork colours, red and white. The blood and bandage, like Carl said. He sounded drunk. And I stood on the blue tiles of the cold hallway, and I wondered who owned the yellow dressing gown I was wearing. Ghost Town was playing at the other end, and I could hear myself crying like an echo down the line. 68. Carl said the lads couldn't believe that Linton Kwesi Johnson drove our taxi to the clinic, and when I said I couldn't believe it either, he got angry and said, "It's the drugs. Those bastards have tampered with your mind." And I told him that the Valium was pure useless, and that I wasn't upset myself, only there was another person inside me protesting. And I heard Carl say they're after splitting her personality before he passed the phone to Dora, and then they realised she was the wrong person. And I could hear Tom saying, "Ah, Jesus, no, look at her face." So I ended up crying to the bride who was real, because Murphy never lied. It was a real wedding with a real bride who said she didn't care if I had a split personality. And I apologised for bursting into her wedding. And when I asked about Dora, she said not to worry. Sure, Dora's flying, girl. 69. When I came out, I couldn't remember if it was morning or evening, and I was with everyone except Dora, and I was laughing like mad. We went down 2 flights into Ward's Irish House in Piccadilly. I wanted to be underground. I wanted to stand on the tube platform and feel the fierce wind. Ward's had pale green and white tiles because Tom said it had been an Edwardian lavatory. The counter was silvery metal and they had draft Guinness, and I had to sit on a barrel with it digging into me, and I believed that it was pure justice. Carl bought me a pint and we took blues again, only I didn't go up, I went down. I went down and vomited 3 times. And Carl said it was a pity we didn't have a camera for a photograph of ourselves in front of the statue of Eros in Piccadilly. And Tom said, "She's probably had enough of Eros now." So that's it. I don't think I'll read. How long have I been reading for? I know it's the jet lag, sorry. 20 minutes. Well then I don't think will I do a tiny bit of Pentonville? I'll do a small bit of Pentonville. It's great when you have jet lag, you can blame everything on it. I'm normally really impatient with poems who are not good with time, so it's actually, I'm really embarrassed. But I'm continuing. Sorry, it's just because I said I was going to read it, now I'm going to. So, it's 10 years on, and she's a radiographer. She's still with Carl, and they're married. And Linton Kwesi Johnson was a big, as I said, he was a big hero to me, and I had his tape when I used to drive to Pentonville, and I wanted to, because there's a lot of black and white in it, that's the main colours, because it's set in a dark room, and so then I wanted to put some white music in as well, because Linton Kwesi Johnson was there. So I thought, because there's a drinking theme, so I thought you're probably all too young here to remember George Jones and Tammy Wynette, but she sang a song called D-I-V-O-R-C-E. So I'll just read a tiny bit, because I really feel terrible that I've gone over time. Let's see. Okay. So it's in conversation with Dracula, so there's a little bit from Dracula at the beginning, and then there's the sonnet, and then at the bottom there's something from the security booklet from Pentonville Prison, because I still have the 1994 security booklet. They told me I had to sit down and read it all before I left the prison, and I said I had to pick up my baby, so they said, "Okay, you can take it home," and then I found it. I was told it was never to leave the prison. I still have it. So, 1. "Come," he said, "tell me of London. Dirty, grey, sallow, clanging Pentonville Prison gulped me every Wednesday morning and spat me out in 4 hours, stinking of fixer and developer, my black suede shoes sodden, stiff neck tingling, hand on the gear stick, glued inside red Astra on the spiderweb crossroads at York Way. Why should turning right be a matter of force? I hadn't asked for war. Clutch, I said clutch. Carol was shaking and angry at the mercy of me behind the wheel. Would I die on the road because of a drunken driver? Was I as bad as a drunken driver? But you're doing a great job, said Carol afterwards. That's not what you said on the West Way, I said. I'm terrified. I want to leave the prison. We can't afford it, he said. Same for driving lessons, DIVORCE, and the internet. Then overnight, he asked me to step up, right onto the accelerator. To help an inmate to escape or attempt to escape, the maximum penalty is 5 years imprisonment. I might skip a few. 2. We appeared to fly along. It worked out at £135 a month. Dr. Gray showed me around 2 X-ray departments, HMP Holloway and HMP Pentonville, just in case I could do both. It was my lunch hour at the Whittington, and when I got into his charcoal Volvo, I left the London I knew. 1 minute we floated past the Nag's Head. Turning right was nothing to him. He had the special powers. And then we were clicking the car doors shut outside Holloway Prison, as if we'd been beamed in like 2 vampires. Some people just knew they were in control of the wheel. I couldn't believe the smooth glide down Holloway and up Camden Road. He didn't shake with steel fear of going as fast as 30 miles an hour, his neck in flames, the cloth stuck to his back. In the prison car park, he took out a black belt with a chain and a whistle. "You won't be needing one of these, Mrs. McGlinchey," he said. "Be aware of your role in the effective management of the security of the establishment." The front door was glass, and when the automatic doors closed, fear wrapped me like black plastic. They gave him keys to put on the chain. There'd been a fight over one of the officer's girlfriend. Someone had a black eye. He thought it was funny. I thought it was exciting. If only I was a lesbian, it would explain everything, and then Carl would have to let me go. Argued, guilt-ridden and mesmerised out of my own mind, if only I had a doctor's certificate. This woman is a certified lesbian. Otherwise it would have to be a fatal accident on the road. Divorce is out while negative equity lasts. Carl was an estate agent, and I'd spent so many times stiff with worry he'd be killed as I walked around the immobilised blood and alcohol-smelling bodies on the X-ray table. I just turned. If someone had to have the blood drained out of them, why should it be me who took care of baby? I think I should stop. Just wonder. Right. Oh yeah, so I just finish. I just do a couple more. So the equipment is very bad in the prison. It's very ancient and old, and he says that he keeps writing letters to have it updated, because I think a lot of the equipment wasn't even safe from the point of view of radiation. And then he's always going on about, because in England the prisons are His Majesty's Prison Services. Back then it was the Queen, so it was Her Majesty's Prison Services. And so Imelda says, "Wouldn't you think the Queen would be pure embarrassed to have her guests treated like this? Oh, you Irish," said Dr. Gray, and Matron joked him about the pool. HMPS was very correct, he said. I must always refer to myself as Mrs. McGlinchey, and his long legs scissors under his white coat, speeding me through corridors to the dark room. No automatic processor, only wet developing. I'm grey from writing letters requesting updated equipment, but the wheels are slow in HMPS. Slow? I'd never seen a manual darkroom in my life. Maybe you should write to the Queen, I said. And then we were where he wanted to bring me. The huge room lit up, quiet, royal blue pool, HM's lion shimmering in gold on its floor. I swim here every Wednesday, he said, and I looked at him. Yes, I know, it's a shame, what a waste, never used. His silver fillings caught the light. A thick white line across the road shows the point at which the vehicle must stop. So I think I'll stop here as well, because I've gone on.
Thank you very much, Martina. That was wonderful. Perhaps I could ask you about this connection between poetry and prose, and the kind of progression to the long poem. Can I take this off? Yes.
these thoughts are in my head. I suppose there's an excitement and an intensity about writing poetry. I just like, and I love film. I'm very influenced by film. Because the sonnets are like frames to me as well, or windows, and I wanted it to look like the classic American ratio, so that's why I shaped it in this size. You know, like the films of John Ford. Again, I sound like a dinosaur. You don't know about John Ford. So it was something that grew over many years because I wrote the novels, but the novels always felt like schoolwork, like duty. And I remember I had to sit down to a desktop computer, and I hated that. And I loved the way you could write poetry on the bus, or you could have it in your pocket. And so, I mean, eventually I got to writing these units, but I did. There was a novel that got lost, and it was called All Alcoholics Are Charmers, but I took some of the poems out of that, or I converted some of it into poems, and I quite enjoyed them, and they became a book of poems, but I don't think I had the confidence to kind of step out and try a new form. And then I went on with the novels, and my last novel was published by Bloomsbury in 2000, and I was supposed to be doing a historical novel. And I did loads of research, and I got really bogged down and fed up with it. And I went through a really traumatic time, and I started writing poetry again, and it was, oh my God, it was like, you know, there had been a drought, and it was like the monsoon rain falling on me. It was just such a beautiful feeling, and I thought, I'll never write anything but poetry again. And I did a lot of novel bashing then. Not other people's novels, but my novels. Like, I hated the novel, it was bad and it was terrible. But I think it's kind of crept back. So I did have a novel, and I said to my agent that I'd converted over Christmas into, various things were turning up in poems, and it all seemed to be, I was thinking, this is great, I only write poems, that's it. And I also liked the freedom of it. I didn't like the way I was told, oh, you know, the readers will want their $6.99 worth, so you have to have a happy ending, or positive, slightly up ending. And I realised because there's no money in poetry, nobody cares. And I love the fact that it's not, I hate all these like autofiction, creative non-fiction, memoir, novel. You know, for me with the poem, I'm just working, some of it's fictionalised, I'm just writing, and I love that nobody cares, because it's not going to have to be put into a certain section by market people. So I liked that freedom. And then that Christmas holiday, I had a really bad tooth infection, and I got really strong tablets with codeine. And it's not the first time it's been connected with creativity, because Coleridge was addicted to laudanum, and I'm fond of it myself, to be honest. So I had a horrible tooth infection. So I'd get up in the morning with coffee and the codeine, and my daughter was a teenager by then, and she'd be asleep, so I'd have the silence. And the minute I saw the big, I thought it looked like one of those mattresses that people were throwing out, like a stained mattress, the novel that I'd been working on, and I pushed it away, and I thought, no, I just want to write what's memorable. I don't want the in-between stuff. I would get myself into things like people would get on a train and I couldn't get them off. I know lots of you write here. Do you know the way you I found that just cutting, you know, I suppose like montage and film techniques really worked for me. But when I was sitting on my codeine and coffee in the morning, it was pure instinctive, and I was just going for what was memorable, and I was basically entertaining myself, because life is really hard. And then when writing turns into a burden on top of all the other burdens, the thing that you turn to for relief, and then it just turns into another job, I mean, that's just the end, isn't it? So I think it was at that point I wanted to entertain myself. Because, you know, Robert Frost says, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. Well, I think if the writer's not entertained, the readers aren't going to be. And then I started to convert that novel very fast, at speed, on the codeine and coffee in the morning. And then I don't know if it affected it or not, but we had the box set, the entire set of The Wire, and my daughter would rise like any 16-year-old, self-respecting 16-year-old at about 2 p.m. and then we get takeaways and watch The Wire for the rest of the evening, and then up in the morning on the coding and coffee. So you can see it was really enjoyable. And I really, there's one thing I always say to my students is to go for the hot spot, to go for the really powerful stuff, because what's the point in trying to please anybody else? And the people who are really successful anyway, I think are often people who just went for what they wanted to do themselves. And it mightn't be everybody's cup of tea.
But it's your cup of coffee and coding.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I could just ramble on forever, so I won't, because I've gone,
Perhaps we could ask the audience if they have questions. I hope we have converted you all, if you're even thinking of the novel, that we have converted you all to poetry at this stage.
Well, it's a kind of a novel, it's just to speed it up.
Yeah, speed it up novel.
Yeah.
Do we have questions? Yes.
Is there a reason why you feel like if you convert to poetry, you can't like also write other stuff? Is it just because you don't want to, or do you feel there's something like about poetry that demands like exclusivity and like monogamy?
No, I mean, I think what I was kind of saying, but I was speeding it up, so I probably didn't explain it properly, is that I took this really bad reaction against the novel around 2000 because I got bogged down. And I think it was my method of writing. And then I stuck to poetry. But I do think these long narrative poems are very closely related to the novel. So I think I just kind of found my own form and there's a freedom in it. So, you know, when I was saying I was novel bashing, I'm not now. It's just these are different kinds of novel. And so I do write essays from time to time and articles and reviews. And that's different. And I absolutely love the novel. Like in many ways it probably was my first love. I think I've found some way of combining it. And I think in a way, what I'm trying to do is just to get what's inside of me, my form, on the page, and not to be bothered. Because when you're trying to do something that doesn't suit you, you get kind of angry with it. So the angry period is over now. And I'm kind of accepting the way I write. And I do love the novels. And I want to say is that all the long narratives, you know, in the early 19th century, the bestsellers were Lord Byron and Walter Scott. They were and then changed. And I think it's a great shame, especially with modernism. This is the thing that I think poetry can do everything. And when I taught fiction, I had to teach fiction, and that's when I was grumpy about fiction. And I taught everything with poems. So I'd bring in a poem and I'd show them plot, and I'd show them point of view and voice and character and dialogue, and I realised poetry can do everything because poetry's always been doing everything. Shakespeare's plays are poetry. It's only very recent that, you know, the novel has come along, and it's a wonderful form. I mean, look at Wuthering Heights. That's like a prose poem to me, and she was a poet. So my attitude now would be to be more expansive, you know, and inclusive, because I think poetry can do everything. I'm doing my poems, and I mean some of my novels, like Wuthering Heights, or not my novels, some other novels, are like poems to me. And I love film. I find a lot of poetry in film. So it's more about kind of expanding in a way and embracing other forms. But I think it's what I just, with myself, and I try with my students as well, is when somewhere along the line it got turned into a job and you're kind of thinking, I have to do it this way because that's what's expected of me. I think that's what I would worry about. Because I think whatever you do, you must enjoy it. Because I remember somebody was talking, a novelist was talking, she had terrible problems with her son. He was autistic, and she had to get him into a special school. You know those awful nightmares where she had terrible, terrible time. I think he was excluded from schools. And she said, I only had an hour every day, and I used to just run up to the novel that she was writing, because for her that was it, you know. Like it was a convention novel, but that's where the excitement was and the enjoyment.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was just wonderful. Thinking about the novel and the longer narrative poem, I mean, there were novelists, as you said, who were poetic, and I could think of Melville, or I could think of the Irish Sebastian Barry, who I think is extremely poetic. But I'm interested when you're talking about the frames in relation to the film. So I guess I wonder if I could ask you, as you think about a novel narrative versus the kind of work you're doing here in The Coming Thing, what changes, what's left out? I mean, are you leaving out continuities, or are you keeping continuities, or what does this idea of separate frames give you?
I suppose I just love the space, the white space around it, and I love the way, I mean, for instance, a form that I absolutely adore is the short story, and so many of them are so poetic. Jamaica Kincaid and Dion Brand, I love her, and I've never written short stories, which is interesting because I love them and read so many, and I think that's kind of interesting. And it's very instinctual with me, but when Mountainy Men was set in a video shop, and when I was writing that, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I tried it in every form to see what form worked best for me. So it started off as a novel, then I wrote it as a long prose poem, then I wrote it as a short story, and then I wrote it as like short poems that were 10 syllables long, and that was the one that worked for me. I think for me, the less I put in, the more powerful it feels. It feels very compressed. And you know, I think I really like the drama. I want the dramatic moments, the kind of intense moments, and the voices. So I don't want to do the in-between bits about them getting from A to B. But I think there's lots of different reasons. Like I was talking to Cliona earlier, I used to love the sample books that girls had in sewing classes when I was young, and on every page there was a square of calico with like some perfect example of sewing, and I could never do it. I used to just look at other people's, and I loved that. And I suppose I think of train carriages. I love the films of Ozu, the Japanese director. So I'm thinking of that as well. I mean, how the poem looks on the page is really important to me, but it's like I kind of feel my way around it. And you know, one of the things I also think of it like loads of rooms, and of course we've got stanzas like a room. Alice Munro said people were surprised that she'd open a short story in any page, and she said she thought that a story should be like a house where you could open the door of any room and it would work. And I suppose that's what I tried with these, that if you open any page, you get something. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Reading your book, I felt the frames, and I thought that I'm making it up because I'm into like films and film poetry intersection. So thank you. I feel validated. But my question is about monologue, and it's less common for like screenplay to have those extensive monologues. Yet The Coming Thing is built up like as a monologue, a series of frames of monologues. And it makes me think of theater more. So, yeah.
I know people are always saying to me, wouldn't you write a play? So I suppose I loved actually theatre when I was young. Cork Opera House was a big deal to my mother growing up. But I don't know, as I've gotten older, I'm less into plays. Like, or even the films I like best are with non-professional actors. So
Is it about control?
Do you think so?
Well, I don't know. You know, if you write a play, you have
Have to hand it over.
hand it over to somebody else, and you have to give it to a director, and you have to give it to actors, and it's not your voice anymore; it's the actor's voice. And it's
That's
the
probably.
director's vision. Whereas there, you're in control.
I remember an actor did one of my play or poems on Irish radio once, and I was like, I didn't like it at all. But because it was overdone. But it's not all actors do it. But sometimes the words are the actors. You see, I feel the words are doing the acting. So I think things change as well. The way we, what seems like cliched and overdone and overblown 40 years ago mightn't. I think that's a really good point, actually. But I think Irish people are very dramatic by nature. And V.S. Pritchard said something wonderful about the short story in his introduction to Mary Lavin's short stories, about the Irish in the short stories. So they're very good at telling something dramatic very quickly, but it's a veil for something else going on underneath. So I suppose that links with plays as well, because there's a lot of subtext.
Yeah, but it also links to the time in the book. So you use montage and you cut into the next scene, and it feels like very speeded up, which I'm not sure how that would play with time. But also I was thinking of the topic and the time and the distance that is created in the play, like in the book. And I feel that maybe, so for me, I thought that because it reminded me of the cinema, the screen creates a distance, like immense distance, even if that's the first person narration. You still don't feel it very, there is more distance implied than when there is a theater, there is a real human being acting out, and you feel more dramatic. And that's another thing I wanted to ask about, overly dramatizing some subjects that are less spoken about, like abortion.
Yeah.
I feel that it gets a lot of overly dramatized, and how did you feel about adding more details, because the process is very vague and we don't see it in the text.
Yeah, I suppose I like doing things like that because I feel life is a lot like that. For me, a lot of things happen off stage. I think the distancing for me is probably with humour as well. I think that's a very Irish thing, the gallows humour, I'm not sure I'm answering your question properly, though. I feel bad about it.
I'm not sure I asked it properly.
Thank you so much. I don't know, but I think it's interesting. I like things that are implied or suggested, because then it gives the reader more of a, they can make it up themselves. I think that's important to me, that the reader is really part of it. So, because in poetry, definitely the reader finishes the poem, and I'd like that to be the way my books are, but I'm not sure if they are or not. But I know that the humour is, the darker my feelings are, the more I want to use humour. I suppose, yes. It's with a lot of communities, isn't it? That the really dark stuff is joked about.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And a masking mechanism.
Yeah.
Perhaps we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much for your reading, and it feels very appropriate to have you read from a work that touches on sort of the vicissitudes that come out of living in a time when mass incarceration, the imperilment of women's rights seems so exigent. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see as the relationship between poetry and state power.
That's a hard one. I suppose they're kind of opposed, really. And I suppose poetry, I kind of hate this phrase in a way, tries to speak truth to power. I think I'm quite satirical, and I think that's it's always been the way of one way of fighting power actually is to satirize it and to laugh at it. So I think I do that a lot, and it continues on in the prison thing. I have really enjoyed messing around with their security booklet and their rules. And it was Charlie Chaplin kind of made fun of Hitler, didn't he? So yeah, I suppose I see poetry as satire, and in Irish society as well. There's curses and a lot of it. I suppose it's just I find it really hard to talk about it now because I just see that kind of monster that's going around in the blue suit. We all know who I'm talking about, with the red tie and the golden hair. And he's kind of the opposite, I suppose, of poetry in a way, isn't he? He's very much the opposite. It's hard to know, it's funny, I went to Riga in Latvia and the poets were saying that poetry was really thriving under communism and that it's fallen away. People are not, people were, when they were fighting against the oppression, poetry was a very underground thing and there was lots of people reading it. They're not as interested in it anymore. Now that they're not in the fight, and I think that's quite interesting, that people reach for power at times of trouble. And actually the time when I got really fed up with the novel was when I spent an extended time going through the courts in London, the family courts, which was very, very difficult. And I ended up in a place called the High Court, the Royal Courts of Justice. And this isn't answering your question, but I'm going to say it anyway. I discovered that my great-grandfather had walked those. It's a very impressive building, i.e. very, very frightening building, with lots of people with wigs and lots of pomp and stuff like that. And that he had been there in 1913. I was there in 2000. I finished there in 2003. And in 1913, he was there taking on the White Star Company who ran the Titanic. His name was Patrick Ryan. He was Thomas Ryan and his son was Patrick Ryan. And Patrick Ryan was going to New York to be a policeman. And of course he died because he was in steerage. There's very romantic stories about in the family that he saved a wealthy woman and all that, and that she came to visit my grandmother and her daughter, but he did die. And he got £100 compensation, and it was the first time that anybody did that. And it set a precedent. And he was an elderly farmer from County Limerick, and I didn't know about it. But 90 years later, I was there about my daughter in the same courts. I do think that there's a very strong urge in me to subvert, like a really, really strong subversive. There's Alice in Wonderland. There's a quote from it that turns up in a lot of my books, because I think Lewis Carroll, he was amazing what he did. But it's a terrible, worrying time, and actually I was chatting with Emily Garvey Harvey today, and I was actually thinking that the other thing that I really love is folk tales, and I was thinking about it recently because drunken driving is all about escape, and it occurred to me recently that all plots are escape attempts. You know, people are always being rescued, they're always escaping, because I think there's something about humans that they want to imprison and exploit, and they've done it to animals for years. That's probably my hotspot, is, you know, everybody's, you think, if I was to get up and fight and, you know, maybe join a resistance, I think I'd do it for the animals more than anything, because of what we've done to them and what we're doing to them. And there's something about human beings that they want to cage. Birds, animals, other people, contain them. It's about control. You know. But we're back to control and power, and I don't know. I suppose the planet will just burn out pretty quickly now, or drown itself or something.
Well, I think we need to finish a little more.
I know, somebody said to me once, I met somebody and she'd read my books, and a mutual friend introduced us, and we were in the pub, and the more I drank, the darker it was getting, and she was saying, and your books are so funny. I said, I know, I'm sorry, they come from a dark place. So on a positive note, yeah, the older I get, the more I realise that writing, like I said earlier, is about finding your voice, is like a cliche, but finding your form and actually really going for what draws you in, and not feeling you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way, because then it's like back with the capitalists, isn't it? So it's a bit of a weak ending. Sorry, I didn't have time to edit it.
Thank you very much, Martina.